let's dive right in. We are finished with 2 weeks of college football already. I know it's a bit late, but yeah, we opened up 2 weeks ago against the University of Northern Colorado, and we beat them pretty thoroughly, 35-7. Kieran, I want to kind of get your thoughts on what you saw the first game of the season, how you think we did, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think that we got off to an awesome start, to the season. I think that the biggest thing that stood out to me was no interceptions from quarterback Brendan Lewis, who's finally sort of taken over the reins of the CU Buffs program for himself now. We saw him, briefly sort of at the end of the Alamo Bowl game, and now we're sort of seeing him really get to take charge of this football team and sort of make it his own. And that's been super exciting for me to see. I think that, UNC obviously was not the most, the most difficult opponent that we were going to see all season. And so I definitely took that win with a little bit of a grain of salt to begin with. But, I think now, as we sort of, got 2 weeks to sort of contextualize it, it showed that this team's for real. But the offense played really, really well. It was conservative. It wasn't a super, super exciting sort of offense, but it was just conservative. They did exactly what they needed to do. And the defense, stepped up, overall, in a lot of big ways and carried that into week 2 as well. And so I think that was the biggest thing, though, is just eliminating mistakes from, from our offense was sort of the biggest thing that stood out to me overall compared to previous years. But, how about yourself?
I agree. I definitely think that, going into the game, like you mentioned, that UNC wasn't this, tough opponent like we faced in week 2. And to be honest, the first quarter looked terrible. I mean, they looked flat. They looked uncomposed. They looked like they didn't have anything going for them. And they were lucky to put 2 scores on the board. And obviously, they ran away with it late. Like I said, we finally get to see Brendan Lewis be the starting quarterback, which we wanted since last year. And I mean, he looks like a freshman quarterback. He's not going to look good. He's not going to be spectacular. I mean, but he's showed spurts of what he can do. His ability to extend plays with his legs it's something that we definitely didn't see with Montez. We kind of saw with Neuer last year, but I think Lewis combines, the ability to extend plays, and we really haven't seen much of his arm, and I kind of want to see more of it. But the kid's got potential, and he's got plenty of offensive weapons around him to be good. I think our running back room is one of the deepest in the nation. They have the ability to just come at you with power backs after power back after power back, and that's pretty impressive considering most universities only ever get 1 or 2 of those type of players, while we have 3 to 4. That definitely takes some of the pressure off of Lewis's shoulders, I think. But I think the best part about this team is the defense. We saw it against UNC, and as we'll talk about next, we saw it against A&M. That the defense is what's going to win us games. Now the offense needs to produce more, and we'll get to that in a bit. But our defense is incredible. I think with Nate Landman at the center of that, and we've raved about him since last season. He's still one of the most underrated defenders all of college football. Continues to get overlooked. He is incredible. I mean, I think that he is someone who runs that defense really well, who really just embodies what it is to play a physical brand of football. And I think everybody feeds off of him. The D-line has looked incredible. The secondary, which was kind of the shakiest part of that defense because it's the youngest, looked really, really good both in the UNC game and in the A&M game. So it gives me a lot of confidence that what they're putting out there in terms of defensive scheme has worked. I think there was a lot of questions coming into the A&M game thinking like, oh, they weren't going to be able to match up very well against a bigger, more high-powered offense that A&M presented, and they more than held their own, and they were the MVP of the game. So I think the UNC game was a nice warm-up. It's always good to get a win under your belt week one. But I think the bigger discussion is definitely the A&M game.
Yeah, and I think that you obviously you're right that Brennan Lewis does look like he looks like a freshman quarterback. I mean, he doesn't but I would say that one of the things is and some of that's he lacks a little bit of confidence in the pocket. Fortunately, he's got some legs that can sort of help him scramble out of some difficult situations and things like that. But one of the things that I was sort of just most impressed overall by was the fact that the one of the Colorado's biggest issues, I feel like, sort of in previous years, was the fact that certainly last year we talked about it a lot, was that like the offense could be a little bit of their worst enemy, their own worst enemy. They would be they'd make huge plays, and then the defense could come up with the stop, and at the same time then the offense would be responsible for a pick six or something of the like, which would then set them back and sort of negate whatever offensive progress that they had made in the first place. And so I think to see this offense playing a little bit more conservatively, playing within themselves, and Brennan knows that he's not a sort of the same sort of seasoned quarterback that he's seeing on the other side of the football a lot of the time, but because he knows that, he's playing within himself. They're relying on the run game. They're relying on Jarek Broussard's been stepping up already, sort of in a lot of big ways. We saw it this past weekend. And as a result, I sort of doing that, they're sort of controlling what they can manage to control, eliminating the variability of just going to like a super passing heavy game. And to be honest, a lot we've seen some drops from some of the key receivers, which has been a little bit difficult to see. Daniel Arias with a little bit of some bobbles. I mean, also a player who hasn't had as much experience on the field, hasn't seen as much of the field as some of the other players. Given the fact that we've had a really, really strong receiving core in some of the past years. So he's definitely despite not being a freshman, seems to be getting his sea legs about him a little bit as well. But yeah, the fact that we've just eliminated mistakes on the offensive side of the ball is certainly the biggest thing for me. And then I think the obvious thing is the biggest thing last year. The biggest thing this year is the fact that Nate Lim and that Colorado secondary still is just so reliable, and I think is really showing up as one of the stronger secondaries in Pac-12 from what I've seen so far.
Yeah, I agree, and this is kind of how I want to transition into talking about the A&M game, because they could have beaten, in my opinion, the way that defense played on Saturday, they could have beaten anybody in the nation. Now the offense did them no help, which I'll get to in a bit. But that defense almost held A&M to not a single first down in the first half. That's incredible. You can say all you want that, their starting quarterback went down and they bring in a second string. But, I mean, he still goes to A&M. They still have arguably the best running back tandem in the nation. They have one of the best offensive lines in the nation. They have a deep receiving core. They weren't ranked number 5 for nothing. They're a really good team. And this defense played like they were the number 1 team in the nation. It just came down to the fact that the offense really just couldn't get anything going, and I had to question some of that play call in the second half because I think they played it a bit too conservatively once they had that lead, and missing the field goal hurt. That key offensive drive towards the end of the second quarter that they turned over on downs at A&M's 10-yard line. That can happen. Those are opportunities against a number 5 team that you gotta convert. In all reality, we should have won that game 17-10, and we should have been walking out of that stadium with a win, with a national ranking right now. But they let that opportunity slip through the cracks, and in no way, like I said, and I'm sure like you'll say that game was on the defense. The defense played their heart out. Lamon had a game. Christian Gonzalez had a game. and they did everything right when everyone was saying they were going to get blown out. They proved everyone wrong. And the one thing that needed to happen was the offense just needed to be a little less conservative, and they needed to just trust what was going on. They completely went away from what was working. They stopped running Brendan Lewis in the second half. They went away from the run game. They played it conservative with these like 5 to 7 yard slant passes that worked, but it just didn't get anywhere. And it constantly was 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, and they get forced off the field, and only just had to put extra pressure on our defense to continue making stops. And eventually, the luck wore out, and they just were on the field for all of the second half, and they scored a touchdown, and they won 10-7. So I mean that loss just absolutely stings in every way possible.
I agree. I mean, so I think that I obviously completely agree that the defense held up amazingly. I mean, I think the defense, like it was really, I mean, it was a phenomenal defensive showing from the Buffs, and I think that absolutely you're right that the field goal hurt us because it's just so. I mean, it would have created a little bit of separation, sort of, in the toward the end of that game, and as we saw in the in like the last quarter or so, the Buffs offense was just 3 and out, give the ball away, 3 and out, give the ball away, and it was just the fact that we were relying essentially solely on the fact that the defense was able to just like then themselves force a stop. And despite the fact that we were punting from, our own 10-yard line, 15-yard line, whatever, able to stop, able to hold A&M to a point where they weren't able to make, any progress, to be able to at least take a field goal or whatever. I mean, I think it definitely helped that we were playing a second-string quarterback. At the same time, he was taking over for a freshman starter for A&M. And so I think that's worth noting that it's, that A&M, as you said, wasn't playing, as number, a number 5-0, and it was really great to see that the Buffs. My biggest fear with them coming into this game, which I feel like has been an issue of theirs, to an extent in the past, certainly when playing beyond the conference, is that they get in, that they have a tendency to be intimidated by the likes of, say, Texas in the Alamo Bowl last year, things like that. When you're playing, these legacy football programs, especially, A&M plays in the SEC, like I was afraid that in and of itself was going to have Colorado playing, much more jittery, sort of out of their own element, and then again them sort of starting to become their own enemy solely because they were feeling this pressure from the fact that they're playing this big sort of name brand national powerhouse. And I didn't see them shy away from that, which was the biggest, I think, positive takeaway for me, is the fact that they showed that they are, willing to, step up toe to toe with these powerhouse kinds of programs. And as a result, by, without shying away from that, like really have a super strong showing, certainly at least from the defensive end. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts about the offensive struggles, because I mean it was obvious to everybody who was watching the game that we just could not get anything seemingly going on offense. Jarek walking in the end zone at the beginning of the game, and then it was sort of that seemed to be all that we had. It was really unfortunate to see Dimitri Stanley fall just short of that first down in that sort of last that last push drive. I know that he walked out the field grimacing, seeming like he was really just going to sort of take that one a little bit personally, but it obviously was not his fault. The passing game certainly didn't seem to be there. Brendan Lewis seemed to be losing a little bit of his confidence down the stretch there, and we could afford, we were at a point where we could no longer afford to be sort of relying on our running game. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what the offense. Well, what is the CU offense? CU offensive issue, your key offensive issue at this point.
I just don't think they trust Brendan Lewis enough. Like I understand he's a freshman quarterback, and I get that. He's inexperienced, but but he was a highly touted prospect coming into CU, and he was the guy that was gonna be that start of that turnaround, and as much as like whatever they did against UNC just didn't seem to replicate itself against A&M. And yes, I know A&M is a far superior opponent than UNC, but I think I don't know, they just seem to like, yes, they kind of let up a bit in terms of how conservative they played their offense, but they still played it way too conservative for my liking. And with an opportunity to beat not only a top 10 ranked team, but a team from the SEC, who a conference that in itself is a far superior conference than anybody else. You got to take some risks, and your defense was playing so well all game that you had ample opportunities to take risk. And if they don't pan out, fine. Your defense was playing so well with all the confidence that it wouldn't have hurt you. And it just seemed that, especially in the second half, they stopped running Lewis, and they didn't. It seemed like they just did not throw the ball more than like 5 or 7 yards downfield. And you're not only going to beat an SEC team like that. You're not going to beat any Pac-12 opponent like that. I think this conservative brand of football is all well and good against a team like UNC, but a team against like Oregon or USC, we're going to get crushed. We're not going to. If you can't put points on the board, you can't consistently rely on your defense to step up. And you have this plethora of offensive weapons, whether it be Broussard, Fontenot, Rice, just Brady Russell, any of these type of guys who can step up and make big plays. You just got to instill some confidence into Lewis that not only does he have the legs to extend plays, but he's also got a decent arm. And I'd love to see him throw the ball more than 10 yards downfield. Because sure, he doesn't have the big play threat like Montez does, but we don't need that to be. We don't need him to be the big play threat guy. We need him to, 15-yard passes downfield, move the chains, keep the offense going, keep the momentum going. And I just didn't see that on Saturday, and it caught up to them, and it bit them in the butt in that fourth quarter when they really just needed a point. Even a field goal on the board would have been fine, because then the game would have been tied and you would have gone to overtime. And you never know what happens in overtime. You saw what happened in the Nebraska game from 2 years ago. We beat them in overtime. No one thought we were going to beat them. You never knew what was going to happen. So I think I'd like to see them play a little less conservative, especially when your defense is playing that well and you have some opportunities to kind of test it out, especially in like that middle of the second quarter, maybe in the beginning of the third quarter, and just kind of gauge where your team's at. And if it's not working, go back to being conservative. But at least you gave yourself the opportunity to see how it was working. We just didn't see that. And I think that really came up and bit them in the butt on Saturday.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think that in order, like, some of what I'm attributing to Brendan Lewis's seeming lack of self-confidence is based upon the fact that it's not being shown to him from the coaching staff, right? So I think that it's a necessary thing for them to show to show him their confidence, their confidence in him, in order for him to then be able to stand tall in the pocket and not immediately feel like he needs to just drop back and rely on his running skills and things like that. And then if he starts to sort of establish himself as a quarterback with a very strong passing ability, then if that opens up the ability for him to be able to use his running as a threat that the teams might not be set up for, depending on what defense they see lined up on the other side. And so I think that is, I think you have a really strong point there in terms of Brendan Lewis not perhaps not being trusted enough. At the same time, I think that we haven't seen there were some opportunities on the part of our wide receivers that I think were lost. I think that there were some dropped catches that also, could have given, the coaches reasonable reason to not have confidence just in our passing game overall, not just solely from Brendan's perspective, but also, more broadly from the perspective of our wide receivers being able to make big catches. I'd like to see, Levante Chenault step up. I'd like to see Brendan Rice step up. I'd like to see some of, Daniel Arias step up. I'd like to see all these guys who have shown that they have a lot of talent. They show they have speed. They've got they've got the height, they've got the speed, they've got all the the qualities there to beat cornerbacks, and they do so. And now we just need to capitalize on those opportunities downfield in order to be able to sort of elongate the our sort of our offensive threat, and then be able to go back to either just like opening up screen options with Jarek, or what have you. We saw. I mean, we were able to see a little bit of that sort of that duality against UNC, but we certainly didn't against A&M. I think from the coaching staff's perspective too, against A&M, with this much bigger opponent, we certainly did revert back to what we knew to be sort of just our own bread and butter. And as a result, that was just what felt comfortable and what felt doable in the moment. And so I think that, I think that that's all good and well, but we really do need to show our own offense that we have that confidence in them in order to then see it for ourselves, displayed for us, out on the field. And, and that's going to be necessary coming up against, a Minnesota team that, as again, out of conference, a very strong team has, historically been sort of just in and out of the top 25, but a super strong opponent. And so, I'd be curious to sort of hear your thoughts on, sort of what we've learned from these past couple of weeks. More broadly, how does that contextualize in the, in the course of the Pac-12? I mean, obviously there's, a lot of news coming out of the Pac-12 today, shaking things up. USC's firing their head coach. You love to see it. Big loss to USC, big loss to Stanford. We've got only two teams that are 0-2 at the bottom of the 0-2 so far at the bottom of the Pac-12 table. But how does CU fit into the broader Pac-12 context, do you think, right now?
As much as we can kind of I don't want to say bag on them for this loss, this loss in the big picture isn't that. Come time when it's time, it's bowl season, and hopefully we're bowl eligible. This loss looks good. A 10-7 loss to a then ranked number 5 A&M, who I assume is going to be ranked, hopefully continue to be ranked throughout the year in the top 10, because it just makes us look even better. A win, and then a win Saturday against Minnesota. A decent, Big Ten team who will have some wins against some good opponents, only makes us look better. And I think we're positioned. I like how we're positioned right now. We're 1-1. We won the game we're expected to win. We lost the game we were expected to lose, albeit at a much closer margin than people expected. And I think a win against Minnesota really propels us into a very tough Pac-12 schedule. After Minnesota, then we're at Arizona State, who right now is ranked. Then we're home to USC. That's a tough 2-game stretch. Even with USC being beaten by Stanford, they're still the cream of the crop in the Pac-12 in terms of talent. And then the schedule gets easier with home to Arizona, at Cal. This team showed me that they can play against anybody, anywhere. And I think in the grand scheme of the Pac-12, I think we have a good shot at competing. Now, do I think we're going to win the Pac-12? No. I think there's well enough teams that are better than us, but I think we can compete. I think we can get above 6 wins. And if our defense played like they played on Saturday, and if our offense wakes up and finally starts clicking, we're a dangerous team. So it really comes down to how our defense can replicate their success, and how this coaching staff can instill confidence not only in Lewis but in this offense that you're much more talented and you can play a lot better than you played on Saturday. If that happens, we can beat anybody in this conference.
I mean, I agree. So I mean, certainly, I think the good news is for CU, right, overall, is that I think the Pac-12 in this past couple of weeks has made a name for itself on a national scale, right? So I mean, we had Oregon State go down to Oregon. We had, a week ago, we had UCLA with the big upset over LSU. Not a lot of people would have seen that coming. I certainly wouldn't have. Given UCLA's performance over the past couple of years. Perhaps Chip Kelly's for real, and things are starting to finally click. And he's gotten his recruiting classes sort of set up in such a way that like now things are starting to click for him in the way that they once did at Oregon and stuff. And I think that what happens with USC sort of remains to be seen, just because they're obviously going through some like some coaching changes right now. Ultimately, I think that those are probably going to be better for USC in the long run, but I don't know how quickly that adjustment is going to either help or hurt the Trojans overall. And so I think that the way, I think that what CU did this past week, by forcing Texas A&M to win the game with literally like 2.5 minutes left, and on their final drive. With the exception of the victory formation, that we saw at the very end of the game after our 4-and-out. I think that CU positioned itself with Oregon and UCLA in my eyes, at the top of the Pac-12 in terms of Pac-12 teams that are here to compete with the brands that sort of always dominate the top of the AP poll and the top of the coaches poll and things like that. And so, with the Big Ten and with the SEC. And so, I was surprised to see the UCLA win. I was honestly pretty surprised to see the Oregon win as well. But then the fact that I think that CU showed that at the very least, we're not a team that's going to get trampled by an SEC school, that's going to get trampled by the likes of a Big Ten school, or any of that, like anybody else outside of the Pac-12. I think the Pac-12 sort of tends to lose a little bit of respect in terms of Power 5 conferences as far as football goes. And what they showed is that they're here to play and to potentially make a splash. And so I think that we have a whole lot of potential to really disrupt the national rankings as far as the Pac-12 because of this UCLA win, because of this Oregon win. And I think that that'll then ultimately bode better for the Buffs, because then when we have the opportunities, we get 2 opportunities to play the both of them, not 2 opportunities, 1 opportunity to play to play them, that it'll then give us just that much better of an opportunity to put a stamp of credibility on the CU name, which I think is all we can be asking for at this point.
Mm-hmm. I think for me the biggest takeaway of that A&M game is that we're going to lose games, but we're not going to get blown out like we have in the past. In the past when we've been blown out by a team like UCLA or Washington State or even against teams like Oregon or USC, like we're not going to get blown out. We're going to be competitive all game, and while we may lose games because we're going to lose games, they're going to be good losses because in the grand scheme of things, we played well, we played hard, we win the games we're supposed to win. Then we win the toss-up games, like a game against like UCLA or a game against USC, like those type of games. And then if we lose to Oregon, but it's like a 7-point game or a 3-point game, that's a good loss when it comes to bowl games. And this team proves that they can do it, which gives me confidence not only in this season but going forward that they have the ability to do that kind of stuff. And I really like the trajectory of this program, and I think that give Lewis a year or two, and he's going to be the best quarterback in the Pac-12 without a doubt.
I think you've got. I think absolutely. I think that it's we're making a long-term investment in him, similar to the way that USC sort of made this long-term investment in Keaton Slovis. And I think that then if we can, that sort of, whatever time scale it is that we see Brendan Lewis start to, really emerge on, I think that can be sped up should we be able to open up the passing game against Minnesota this weekend, and then, and perhaps, get a big out of conference win for the Buffs there. But, we'll certainly be diving into that a little bit more on Friday.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect place to end it. Like you said, we'll be back on Friday with our preview of the Minnesota game and any other big breaking news that comes out. Hopefully, we'll know more about that developing USC situation. But like you and I both said, we think it's good that USC got rid of Clay Helton. It's about time. So with that, we want to thank you guys so much for coming. As always, follow us both on Twitter. Our handles are below our faces. Our regular scheduled show will be Fridays at 4 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Mountain time, because we both are obviously in Colorado. But